Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us, those of you that are coming in. It is Wednesday night. We are in the month of December, and I do appreciate all of you checking in tonight. Coming to you live from home plate, from my home here in Torrance. I wanted to spend a few... Jeez. All right, well, if you can hear me out there, if we're getting through on social media, welcome. Mike Hinojosa, Christian Life Church, Wednesday, the first Wednesday, actually the second Wednesday in the month of August. Thank you for coming in. I have Vianney with us on Zoom, so you'll probably be hearing her voice. I am just double checking to see if we're actually on on the other. So checking our social media. We're in Acts chapter 22. For those of you that enjoy actually taking your physical Bible and following along, we would encourage you to turn there. We will try to greet you if I can find you. Let's see here. I'm kind of playing with all these different buttons and things. Let's see here. As I was, those of you can hear me, I was talking to Vianney before you guys came on about what you know, the challenges of social media is just, sometimes it's great and sometimes it's a little bit more difficult, and one thing works and one thing doesn't. And so I try to follow along here. I don't see our feed going through on Facebook. So that's where we get a little bit more of the comments. If you are able to see me, and I just got a message from Hermania in North Carolina, so let me ask her. Hi, Hermania. She'll be I'm going to use her to help me here. So somebody that just came on said hello on Facebook. I'm asking if they can see and hear me because I can't see myself on my other computer here, and so I'll just keep going, even though I can't see the feed. I'm assuming she can. Hello, Hermania. So just want to say hello again to those of you that are coming in. I don't know if we're on YouTube. I don't know what we're on. Again, another one of these challenging moments where, for some reason, I can't see. Lori Hansen says you're good. Okay, thank you. So I guess I can be seen and heard, even though I cannot see it. I've got a computer, I've got a phone, I've got my iPad, and I'm trying to look at the Facebook feed on my iPad, and I am not getting a picture. But I'm glad to hear that, even though I can't see you, that you're there and you can see me. So if you have any comments, those of you that are on Facebook, or want to say hello or have a comment or a question as we go through this tonight, just type it out because I can see your comments. So, okay, why don't we do this? Let's go ahead and step into the reading and the teaching. I hope that everybody is doing well on YouTube also. Thank you, Lori. Hope you guys are doing well. It's kind of a strange time, isn't it, as we once again are facing the challenges of COVID and all that goes with it. Vianney's in Texas, and it's Texas is one of those states that is being hit hard again. And so anyhow, I've had conversations with staff today. I had conversations with a pastor friend of mine about the ongoing pressures, maybe. I'll use the word controversies, because once again we find ourselves, and this may be too strong of a comment, maybe it's not, but divided over, the whole to vaccinate, not to vaccinate, whether it, this, that, or the other. The most important thing for me is that you stay safe and that we all stay safe. because once again, we're kind of in the middle of some of this. So I hope you are well, praying for you. I know some people at the church that are recovering. And, you know, I actually, Vianney, I will be in South Texas myself, Labor Day weekend. Me and Sada are going to visit. It's actually one of my class reunions. My brother's asked me to speak for him down in South Texas also, so I'll be down there. And I will tell you that, you know, there's a little something in the back of my head that I am aware that there are some challenges. You know, Austin and San Antonio, I hear, are you know, the numbers and so on. But so, of course, we're all praying. Just obviously, we know, we believe that as we continue to do the right thing, God will always be with us either way. But we do the right things, and we'll be okay. But again, I said all that to say, just hope you guys are doing well. Hope everybody's feeling okay. If you have any questions, if you need and desire, you know, prayer or anything, you just let us know and contact me, contact us at the church, myself, Kim, Alicia, are the three emails that you could primarily use, Bill, Pastor Bill. Just let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And again, I hope everybody is doing well. All right, so let's step into the text. Chapter 21 of Acts. We can just thumb through the pages here a little bit. Coming up to this point in the last couple of weeks, we have been talking about, you know, Paul being warned about going to Jerusalem. One of the things that was really impressive to me that I really enjoyed was how Paul, despite knowing that and being warned by friends and others of what his fate would be in Jerusalem, still was committed. And he talks about very strongly who he's committed to and what his purposes are, and that he would go and he was willing to die for the sake of the gospel. Very powerful testimony. You may want to go back. I really enjoyed that from 21. But as a result of all this, as he does make his way to Jerusalem, he is arrested in the temple. We read about that last week, and it's now in chapter 22. And why is he arrested? In case you don't remember, the Jews accused Paul again of being someone who was teaching against their laws. He says, this man is creating problems for us as a Jewish community. He is really the one responsible for these riots, because if he was not teaching and saying the things that he was, that you know, he's saying, and of course, and they even accused him falsely, by the way, of things, or misinterpreted or turned Paul's preaching of the gospel as a way to say this man is guilty of violating and stirring the crowd himself. So he is arrested, and we catch up in end of chapter 21, at verse 37. He's led to the barracks, and now it's time for him to kind of make a defense before the Romans who have arrested him. And so chapter 22, it should just kind of, it really belongs to the last section of chapter 21. So in chapter 21, you have a verse 40, and then you go to chapter 22, verse 1. Really, it's all together, because this is where, in verse 1 of the chapter, as it's broken up in our Bibles today, he begins to speak. So let me read, brethren and fathers, this is Paul's words, hear my defense before you. This word defense is the word apologia, which it comes from the word apology, and it's not to be understood as him apologizing. You know, somebody would tell you the word is apologia, and you might think, oh, apology, and you might say, it's not so much an apology of saying I'm sorry, but it's a defense. It's the word apologetics, if you've ever heard that term within Christian language and Christianese. The word apologetics, the study of apologetics, is how one establishes a defense for his beliefs. So all of us should have an apologetic of sorts about what we believe and why we believe based on what. Well, so it's a defense Paul is giving, again, not an apology, but it is that word. And so he's going to stand up and he's going to give a defense. He's going to explain to them what is going on, why it's going on, and how it happened. So he makes a defense. He says, verse 2, and when they heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they kept all the more silent. So we're going to find two things. We're going to find that, first of all, Paul now standing before the Jews of Rome, when they hear him speaking in Greek, they're surprised. And so, I mean, the fact that Paul spoke Greek is the very first thing that begins to establish his credibility amongst them. They're surprised, and it catches their attention. It says when he began speaking in the Greek, they kind of, it arrested their attention, and they became silent. And then this is where now he starts in verse 3. He says, I am indeed, he says, a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia. We know him as Saul of Tarsus, right? Now the Apostle Paul. But brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our father's laws, and was zealous toward God as all of you are today. So the first thing Paul does that really gets the crowd, or the Jewish Roman Jews' attention, is that he speaks to them in the language, and then he says, oh, and I've been trained, a Jew born in Tarsus, trained, and this name Gamaliel is a very big name, one of the great teachers of the time. He says, taught by Gamaliel in the strictest of our father's law. So he's saying, you know what, I am a Jew, and I was brought up this way, and I'm zealous. I know the language. I have studied the traditions, and was very passionate. The word zeal, zealous, of course, it means to burn. He said I was passionate about, and very strict. I was raised very, very strict and very, very passionate about the same things that you are. In other words, so he's again establishing his credibility. He is letting them know who he is. He says, again, strictness, I was at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our father's laws, was zealous toward God, just like you all are today. He's saying, you brought me here because you're so fired up about the laws, and know that I was raised and trained the exact same way as you were. He goes on in verse 4, he says, I persecuted the way to the death. Now, if you're wondering, if you haven't heard and you're not aware, the way is what, it was this new faith. Christians, they weren't called Christians right away. We found out that in Acts. But so the segment of people who had left Judaism and began to follow the teachings of Christ, who became disciples of Jesus, were called the people of the way. Again, before they were called Christians, they were people of the way. And he says, I persecute. He says, I was raised strict. I am a Jew. I was raised this way, very zealous. He says, I even persecuted to the point of death people of the way, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. It is a powerful explanation and confession on the part of the Apostle Paul. We know that he was at the feet of Stephen when he was martyred. He was there. He saw it. If you remember when we studied about that, he was all in favor. He was one of those that was pushing, kill him. I mean, this man deserves death. And he's confessing. He says, by the way, before, you need to understand, first of all, my background, who I am, who I was. And so he's establishing this foundation of who he was, because in just a second, he's going to explain then why things have changed, right? It says, verse 5, also the high priest bears me witness, and all the council of the elders, from whom I also received letters to the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring in chains even those who were there to Jerusalem to be punished. He says, the elders trusted me. I was a leader. I was the man that had the entitlement, the rights to physically go. I had the paperwork to go and imprison individuals, and he said men and women. And so he's established who he was, but then here's where it starts to change in verse 6. So now verses 6 through probably about 20, 22, so on, you're going to find a very familiar story. I don't know that I'll take the time to read it. I don't think it's necessary in this regard, because he says it happened, verse 6, he says, as I journeyed and came to Damascus, at about noon, suddenly a great light from heaven shone around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So in these next verses, Paul is going to give the story of his conversion. Most of you are familiar with it. You can go back to chapter 9, but he's sharing his testimony. He's saying, this is who I was, but this is what happened. I was actually on my way to persecute more Christians, but Jesus appeared to me, he confronted me, he asked me, he challenged me about what I was doing and why. I went blind, I saw a light. So he goes through what happened to him in Acts chapter 9. He even talks about God saying to him now, you can find this in verse 13, 14, he says that Jesus spoke to him and said, you have been chosen to speak to the Gentiles, and that you should know his will. And so basically what he's saying is, this is who I was, but Jesus appeared to me, and I'm here because what God told me I was supposed to be doing. He says, and so I've returned, I'm fulfilling God's plan. That's who I was. This is what happened, and this is why you find me being accused and being brought before you for what I'm teaching you. Talk to him about being blind, the whole thing with Cornelius. He goes to this whole thing about why he is standing before them, why he's been arrested. So it's Paul giving a defense, really. Now here's where we take a little turn that you might find interesting in verse 22, and I'll just kind of give you a few comments about it. And please stop me. Hello, Delton. Glad you came in, my friend. See you soon, hopefully. Verse 22. So it says, and they listened to him until his word, and they raised their voices and they said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit to live. So this is the Christian Jews, the Jews from Rome. After Paul tells them who he was and how he came to faith in Christ, they just decided this man is not fit to live. So they want him killed. They already had him arrested, and they wanted him killed. But here's where a little kind of a kink comes into the thing. A little bit of a challenge comes. It says that these Jews from Rome, as they heard what Paul was saying, not only were they crying out, but they're showing their extreme anger and their passion. They begin to tear their clothes off and cry out and throw their dust into the air. This is one of the ways. This was the most significant way to show your grief or your disapproval. They would rent their clothes and they would throw. It was a sign of complete frustration and anger. So they're saying kill him, and they're doing all these physical acts because they are so angry. And this, when it gets to this point, it's like maybe I can make the analogy. It's that a kid, when he throws a tantrum and starts hyperventilating and kicking the walls and just shouting and screaming, as an adult, as a parent, maybe you'd be so. I mean, that's the last straw. This kid is. I mean, this is as far as he goes. Well, this is how the Romans, those that were in power, who had arrested Paul, taken him to the barracks, put him in jail, and now allowed him to give his defense. When they see and hear this, it's kind of like the ultimate, man, what are we going to do? These people are really, really upset. So verse 24 says that the commander, after he's given this defense and told his story, he goes back into the barracks, and the thought was that he was to be, it says that he should be examined under scourging. So if you can follow here, they're going to take him into the barracks again. They're going to take him back into the prison, and they're going to, put the bright light on him. Remember those stories where you'd see a detective and they shine the bright light in your face, to gotta get you to say something or the truth. Well, here Paul is going to be literally beaten, and this is where in the book of Romans you find where he talks about I was beat, I was scourged, I took stripes on my back for preaching the gospel. This is one of those occasions. They take him into the barracks under scourging, that he might know why they shouted so much against him. They said, we beat this guy. He's going to have to tell us something. Something's got to give. But here in verse 25, it goes on, and as they bound him with ropes, with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who stood by, and here's where this whole interesting thing. So they've taken him. You're following me. They beat him. And then Paul finally looks up and he says, by the way, is it legal for you? Is it lawful to scourge a man, to beat a man who is a Roman and is uncondemned? Now, this is where things really, really change, because when Paul says, I know the Roman law because I am a Roman. Now, follow this, and I'll get to the explanation of possibly or probably what this was all about. So Paul comes from Jerusalem to Rome, or he comes into Jerusalem, and the Roman, he's brought to Rome, and he's beat by the Romans. He's not been found guilty. He's been examined. He's been kind of accused, but he's not been found guilty. And the Roman law, it was unlawful to beat a Roman citizen without, what we call it, due process. He hadn't been found guilty. So at this, they are very, very surprised. Verse 26 said, when the centurion heard that, he went and told the commander, saying, take care for what you do, for this man is a Roman. The commander came and said to him, to Paul, tell me, are you a Roman? And Paul says, yes. The commander answered the commander answered, and with a large sum I have obtained this citizenship. And Paul said, but I was born a citizen. So those immediately who were about to examine him, they withdrew. Those who were beating on Paul and mistreating him, after he has established the fact that he's a Roman, they're going to stop to kind of find out whether the case is true or not. Because again, if he truly was a Roman and they had done what they had already done, they were themselves subject to laws, themselves for beating a Roman citizen. As a matter of fact, verse 29 says the commander was also afraid. So the guy that gave orders, the guy that did the scourging, says that they were afraid. Here it is, because they found out that he was a Roman and because they had bound him. So now, what is this whole thing about Paul being a Roman? What we find is, what I studied, what I kind of did some research on, is you say, well, how was Paul? Wait a minute. Paul was a Roman citizen. How did that go about? Wasn't he a Jew? Wasn't he from Tarsus? What? Well, it appears that there's some clues here. Verse 27, the commander came and said to him, tell me, are you a Roman? He said, yes. The commander answered, with a large sum I obtained this citizenship. And Paul said, but I was born a citizen. So this whole thing about you could earn, you could buy, the commander says you could buy a Roman. If you did something good, and this is what I came to study and find out, that when this commander says, I am a Roman, and it was bought with a large sum, that if you did something favorable, if you weren't yourself a Roman citizen, okay, but your parents or maybe even your grandparents, there was a way that you could kind of, quote unquote, buy yourself into citizenship. And usually it had to do with money, possibly, but it also had more to do with, okay, I did something for Rome, and they're going to let me come into the citizenship by things that I've done. So the commander himself has had a citizenship kind of passed on to him, so to speak, maybe purchased. somebody before him, like I said, parents or grandparents, but Paul says, but I am a citizen. And so when this was established, again, the same thing possibly with Paul, that somewhere in the lineage, that he is a part of Roman citizenship while being a Jew, and spending most of his time in Pharisaical training, biblical training in the past. So it's kind of an interesting thing, but the important thing is that they find themselves in a pickle. They find themselves the commanders because they have, first of all, they've heard this man speak in their language. He's talked about his past, how he was zealous, a Pharisee, although he doesn't mention it. He says, the leaders approved of me, they gave me letters, I persecuted people, I saw them die, I myself threw them in jail. I was raised in the traditions, and so these people are really, their heads must be reeling with all this information. And then the coup d'etat, the last little thing is where he says, oh, and by the way, why are you beating me? I too am a Roman citizen. With the final conclusion being in verse 30 that the next day, because he wanted to know for certain why he was accused of by the Jews, he released him from his bonds and commanded the chief priests and all of their council to appear, and brought Paul down and set them before him. So this is what the group called the Sanhedrin. That these Jewish Romans, they've accused. We move back from the Jews putting him, the Jews accusing him, the Romans putting him in jail, and breaking the law by having them scourged and having them imprisoned without proof of guilt, back to now the Jews who are saying, man, what are we going to do about all this? And they release him from the barracks. They have to let him go. I think the whole citizenship must have shook them, and they go, man, we don't have any proof, we got to let this guy go. So now he's returned, released from his bonds. He is commended to the chief. They throw him back into the courts of the Jews and to the council. And so now the Jews, it goes from the Jews to the Romans, back to the Jews, and they're trying to figure out what to do with this man. Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, men and brethren, we're now in chapter 23, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. So he made a defense to the Romans. Now he's making a defense to the Jews. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. When he says, I live with good counsel, again, the furious Jews are still so, when he says, hey, look, I live well. You don't have a right to accuse me. I live well. Again, they're so angry. Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Paul says to them, he says this, and here's a really strong part of Paul coming out again. He says, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. Again, back within them, he said, look, I am who I am, and you have no right, and I live well. So, the Ananias says, this guy's blasphemous. Just hit him in the mouth. You slap him in the mouth. He's speaking blasphemous. And they literally hit him. And God says, God's going to strike you because you're whitewashed. And you hear that term, that on the inside things look, on the outside things look right, but on the inside they're really rotten. And this was a term that was used to describe that on the outside appearance, the tomb may have been cleaned, but it was whitewashed. The real part of who they were was not good, rotten by the sense of the word. For you sit, and he says, based on what does Paul make this statement? He says, you sit and judge me according to the law. And do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? So Paul is saying, you know what, you're whitewashed. You're saying you're judging me because of the law, but you are breaking the law. You're breaking God's commandments. You're going against the heart and the nature of God by accusing me and judging me in a way that's not biblical. That makes sense? Yanni, you guys there? So yeah. It's an interesting way, the way Paul, you can just see this whole scenario hopefully taking place. Those who stood by him said, do you revile God's high priest? So God is talking, here is Paul saying, Ananias, why did you strike me? I mean, you're whitewashed. You're telling me that you're judging me because I am violating your law, and yet you're doing the same thing. Well, somebody on the side says, how dare you talk to the high priest this way? Paul says, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. So he does apologize. What is he doing? He said, oh, I know the law. I apologize. I didn't understand. I didn't know who he was. I didn't have the right to speak to him that way, not knowing this. So you can see he's proving that he understood the law, that he knew the law, that he was a respecter of the law, and so he even makes an apology. But when Paul perceived, verse 6, that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, this to me is humorous part of it. He cried out to the council, men and brethren, I'm a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, concerning the hope and the resurrection of the dead. I am being judged. And the Sadducees, I'm being judged by you, and the assembly was divided. Well, what's going on here? So this will be the last. Well, let me just read it and then I'll explain it and then we'll close. But here it is. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection and no angels or spirits, but the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry. The scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, we find no evil in this man, but if a spirit of an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul be pulled to pieces by the commander, the soldiers took him down, took him away by force among them, and brought him back into the barracks. So this whole thing is really, really, I think if you're following, and I know you are, I think you can have this imagination, you can see this. So they bring him in, they bring him before the Sanhedrin. He has this issue with Ananias, and they slap him, and he goes back and forth. He's all over them about that, and then he kind of, I would assume, very wisely, and maybe God. So he says, he brings up this piece where he says, I am a Pharisee. So there's two religious parties. We talk about today, religious parties, Democrats, Republicans, whatever, independents. So there's, amongst the Jewish community leadership, there was two parties, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Well, the Pharisees, as you saw here, and you probably know, believed in the resurrection from the dead. They believed, as they said, in angels, and the Sadducees did not. So he brings up this piece. He says, I'm a Pharisee. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, well, I'm a Pharisee too. Oh, they remember they have a rival within the same courtroom, and all of a sudden, the emphasis on Paul, right? The focus on Paul now is changed, because now the Pharisees and the Sadducees are kind of distracted because they had such different opinions. So when he brings up, I'm a Pharisee, the Pharisees say, oh yeah, that's right. Look, Sadducees, this man's a Pharisee. He believes like we do. And the Sadducees are going, uh-oh, what are we going to do? Because, we can't. So because of that statement that Paul says, I was a Pharisee, it kind of shifts the attention. And now these two groups, part of the Sanhedrin, this body of Jewish leaders, both Pharisee and Sadducee, they're distracted, and now they're more concerned about their positions than they are, because really they don't have much to say. There's not much to really accuse Paul of. So this whole thing, it's just twist after twist after interesting, because as I moved to wind down by application, God knew what he was doing. And it wasn't Paul's time yet. It wasn't Paul's time to be beaten or killed, because God still had a plan and a purpose for his life. He's going to go to prison, and he's going to write all these prison epistles and other things. He's going to become an object of a huge testimony within the community of both Jew and Gentile. And God is setting, now Paul has to suffer for it. And you're saying, man, that's not fair. But remember, Jesus told him, Paul, You've been called. I am sending you, and I will show you, God said, all the things that you're going to have to suffer for my name's sake. And I think Paul had all of this in mind. He remembered this. He knew it. That's why he was willing to say in chapter 21, look, they prophesied, this Agabus and others said, men, don't go. This is what's going to happen. You remember they took ropes and they tied his hands kind of to illustrate this is what's going to happen when you get there. Sure enough, it happened. But that's why he was willing to say, look, I must go. I will go, even if it costs me my life. Because God had already spoken to him. And more importantly, he had this real experience with Jesus. As he just said at the earlier part, who he used to be. I mean, he went from a murderer to an evangelist and a church planner. And that place in his heart, that reality, I think must have had a lot to do with his convictions, obviously, and his willingness to follow through. So he stands, he knows what to say, God gives him the word, he speaks his story, and again, to end this, the attention is diverted away from it amongst the infight, amongst the Sadducees and Pharisees, as we move into another section and another part of the history of what happens as Paul is arrested and taken to, and Jerusalem comes into Jerusalem amongst the Roman Jews. Okay, well, I think that's a decent place to stop. I think I don't like to usually go more than 45 minutes, and I see that I have been live for 41, almost 42, so that's perfect. What do we take away with that? So this whole study is called Reacts, how to respond to the book of Acts. So we take the history of this book and we're trying to glean and saying, what can I take out of this? How should I react to what I'm reading? What does it mean to me? And so as we shut down here, it's like, what does this say to me? How do I react to the historical narrative? Well, I think all of us would take away potentially slightly little details different, but the narrative of Paul's change, the narrative of Paul, his conversion, and his willingness to be bold, his willingness to suffer injustice. These are the things that we can take away that say, I might suffer some sort of injustice. Somebody may have it out for me for different reasons, but I stay true to the gospel. I stay true to my call. I don't shy away from the things that God has done, who I am, in the light of authorities. So these are the kinds of things that we hopefully maybe can take away, yeah? What can we learn practically for us? So we move from the historic to, okay, what does that mean? And how can I apply that to my life? Where does it have meanings and substance for me? Well, you can take away some of these things, as I've just mentioned, or maybe your own. But history is that, but it is also for us as we read God's word, as we look into God's word, it should affect and challenge, if I can use that word, or bring a sense of, where do I stand, and how do I fit into this picture? Because it should have relevance to your life, and I think it does. So anyhow, take that for whatever it's worth. I would ask that you would pray. I will pray as we close to say, Lord, take this from the historical sense into a practical sense for my faith. And God, what do you want to show me? What should I know? What do you want me to glean personally from this historical event that I just read? And trust that the Lord will show you that. Again, I can give you some examples and so on, but there's really a heart sense, okay, how do I react? How do I react to the book of Acts, and in this case, chapters 22 and the first part of 23? Well, I hope it does benefit you. Again, we're not simply reading history for the sake of being eggheads. I call that being knowledge-filled. History and knowledge is very, very important, but it should translate into our faith, right? And so I'll leave that with you and trust that it will do that very thing. Well, I am at 44:49. Perfect. To say goodnight and goodbye. Just want to remind you, there's a lot of things going on this weekend at the church. Make an announcement about our 50th anniversary. CLC will celebrate 50 years on the corner of Waterloo and Pacific. Most of you are aware that We just celebrated in March 100 years, 4 different locations, Christian Life Church, 4 different locations. City of Long Beach for 100 years. Well, I am fortunate to also be the pastor as Christian Life Church celebrates 50 years on the exact date, which is really cool, which is October the 10th. This year falls on a Sunday, as did our previous day. It's just, God is so good. But we'll give you information about the things we're wanting to do for that. There's some special projects we're putting in place. We have a committee that is organized. We met last weekend. We have some great leaders giving and putting a program and a thing together. We will be sharing that with you. It'll be a 2-night event. I think I'm okay to share that. We're going to gather Saturday night, and we'll explain to you what we're going to do Saturday night, and then Sunday morning for church and so on, we're going to have a celebration, and some historic things are going to happen. We're asking you to help us. We'll give you some more information if you want to get involved specifically in being a part of that 50th anniversary. That's coming. Sunday, I'm sharing a message, so I'll kind of give you a little hint, but it's called I've entitled it The Ideal Sister. The Ideal Sister. And just a kind of a teaser, as you know, Mary and Martha, the narrative is that Jesus comes in, one of them sits at Jesus's feet, and the other one is serving, and Jesus approaches, one of the sisters, and she's upset because why doesn't my sister help me? And so which sister was right? And is there what is the ideal sister look like? I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to give you any more hints, but I think you'll enjoy it. I think it's a very important message about the balance of sitting at Jesus' feet and serving. And again, I'll give it away if I continue, but I want to invite you to that. Whether you're live with us at 11 o'clock, we're not mandating Mass, but we are really highly recommending it. We want to be prudent. We want to be wise. Again, this is unfortunately controversial, even amongst good friends. It can become a piece that divides and is hurtful, and we're trying to avoid that. But you're welcome to join us at 11 o'clock. We respect the rights. We do ask you to be careful with yourself and others, but 11 o'clock at Christian Life Church, corner of Pacific and Wardlow. Getting close to our 50th anniversary. Online will also be on at 11 o'clock. Hopefully we're no glitches, but we look forward to seeing you guys. And again, if there's anything we can do, please let us know. Well, let me pray us out. That's taken another couple of minutes, 2 minutes more than right about what I like. So let me just pray that God would give us grace and wisdom in the face of accusations and difficulties to continue to live our faith and to live out our God-given mission based on who we are and what our story is, just like Paul did with his. Okay, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this narrative of Paul, and we get another glimpse of how he was beaten, how he was accused, how he was unlawfully treated because he had a call in his life, because he had a story, he had a message, he had a mission. And Lord, he's not any different really than us today, that you've given us our story, and we face different challenges, but may we have the grace and the courage and the wisdom to not let go, not to be embarrassed, and to be kind, respectful, as Paul was, by having slapped the high priest and apologizing, but still living the life the way that you've asked us to, because every one of us has a purpose and a mission that you've asked us to execute. Well, be with my friends. Protect us, Lord, this crisis of COVID again. Give us wisdom. Be our healer. Be our friend. Make us a blessing, God, I pray. And so these things I pray for each one and our families and all that we're wanting to do, to God give you the glory in it all. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, everyone. Well, thank you. I will say goodbye to our friends on, let me do this first, Vianney. I will say goodbye to you in just a moment, but goodbye to all of our friends that are on social media. Have a great day. God bless you.